Moving on to 11.0, the superintendent's report. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Little.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly, in the benefit of our time here, I'm going to just turn it right over to Dr. Osmer Smith, and we, once again, another appearance by Dr. Phillips, to talk about our strategic plan, and there's some timeline that we need to work through about what our strategic plan is going to look like moving forward. And we want to give you that update tonight, and we'll be providing you also updates throughout the year. So Dr. Osmer Smith, go ahead, please.
Sure. Good evening, Madam Chair and Board. We're glad to be speaking with you this evening about our strategic plan and to give you a brief update on our status. So in this presentation tonight, we're going to talk to you about the purpose, a brief description of the purpose, as well as our current state, an overview of our revision process, and are going to share with you the connection to our accreditation process, which also is happening this year. So the purpose of a strategic plan is listed on the screen that you see. And as a system, our goal with that strategic plan is to carefully set priorities based on student and staff needs. And then our job over the course of the whole strategic plan cycle is to stay focused on those priorities and so that they're attainable, sustainable, and actionable, as well as scalable across the system. In our district, we have been intentional about marrying our an adaptive strategic plan process with our state's expectations for district and school renewal plans. So you may hear in school settings or amongst administrators at the district level call it both a strategic plan or a renewal plan, but when we say that, it is the same thing. So in our strategic plan, and you know these because you've seen them before, we have 4 specific system commitments that we lean on in our plan. These serve as our priorities over the course of our strategic plan cycle. These same system commitments serve as the foundation for other plans and programs in our district. For instance, they are the foundation of our schools' reading plans, their work plans, as well as our academic recovery plan. So now that you kind of have a brief overview of the purpose and our focus, we wanted to share with you a current status of our strategic plan and provide you with a timeline of our work this year. So after communication with the Department of Education here in South Carolina, we will use the full 5 years to implement our plan. Because we're using a 5-year cycle, we must review our interim measures and action steps, particularly in light of the COVID-19 disruption, to have a plan that's attainable, sustainable, and scalable. So listed here, you're going to see the timeline for our revisions of our current strategic plan. These are intentionally going through this process to make sure those goals, again, are actionable and sustainable due to COVID-19. We will engage in a more formal revision process next year when we begin to write and develop a new plan that will launch in 2023. In October, Ms. Gaskins, Dr. Phillips, and I will be working with the instructional services team to conduct a data review of the strategic plan data. In addition, we're going to work with this team to recommend revisions to the interim goals and action steps listed on the original plan. Later in the fall and into December, we will garner feedback from principals and district administrators, and in January, our plan is to bring a draft to the Board of Trustees for you all to see what we've been doing. Moving into second semester, we will continue to revise the plan as needed, and in March, we will present the final draft to the Board of Trustees. Finally, early in April, we will submit that update to the Department of Education. In doing this work over the course of the year, being careful and deliberate, we're providing the board with an accurate and complete report regarding the progress of our system and schools over the course of time. So listed on the screen is kind of a description of our revision process. And in this process, we will convene our instructional services team to really look at the data and to tune our interim goals and to conduct a review of strategies that we have. That may also include potentially reducing the number of interim measures that you see listed on the plan to those things most critical to achieving our system's performance goals. We also will be leveraging partnerships and research resources to identify best practices around goal setting to specifically address learning acceleration. Finally, we will be, as I stated before, garnering that feedback from administrators, specifically our principal advisory committee, to refine our initial draft. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Phillips.
Hello again. So as Natalie mentioned, we're going to be looking at our data in depth coming up in the next month or so. And during that time, part of that is to review these goals that are set and take a look at how we can, or even if we need to, revise some of them to address some of the setbacks from COVID, the COVID disruption. So what I'm just going to show you here very quickly is some examples of some of the revisions that we see that may need to be made and how we will be making those. So for example, this is one where we would reset the baseline of the data to the 2020-21 school year and then move forward from that using whatever criteria we set for interim measure. So for example here, we had 72.8% was our baseline in that particular year. And then moving forward, we had this year, which kind of threw a wrench in things. And so now we take whatever the data was for this past year, 2020, 2021, look at that data, and then move forward either with this measure that we set, so adding 2 points a year, or determining if there needs to be a different sort of measure there to move us forward, to try to get us back in a place where we needed to be. So that's one possible revision. This slide contains two other examples of possible revisions, and this is a really good example because I know this is struck through, but this is an example where we would remove a goal and then rewrite it. So this goal is about reducing the number of Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions for students. Okay, so the number of students in those levels of intervention. And that is sort of how we were setting that up, going down a certain percentage every year. In the wake of this disruption, it has become clear in our data analysis so far that there are more kids in need of those interventions. And so measurement of that goal is not about getting kids out of that, it's how well we're doing it, right? And so in this particular goal, you may recognize this sort of verbiage from the academic recovery plan. What we want to see is that kids are meeting and exceeding growth targets. And so that's the way we worded this one as well. And it would be, we would set up this goal starting here to determine, how we needed to move those students forward and make sure that those Tier 2 and Tier 2 interventions are getting to the right kids, A, and B, that they're working. So these are two examples of how we would be revising this plan.
So in closing, we did want to share with you how the strategic plan is connected to our accreditation as a system. So alongside our work to revise our strategic plan this year, we are preparing for an upcoming accreditation visit, which is scheduled for May of 2022. Our review will be conducted by a group called Cognia, and the actual review is called an engagement review. Some of you may know or have heard it referred to as an advanced ed visit or an advanced ed accreditation visit. This is the group that is the one that's doing it now. So like advanced ed, the engagement review is completed every 5 years. And like its predecessor, the purpose of this engagement review with Cognia is to provide our system feedback, thoughtful and really deep feedback regarding our current instructional and procedural practices. Also, the outcomes of that visit will help us determine next steps of our improvement process. So as part of that, as part of that Cognia engagement review, we will submit this updated strategic plan as a piece of evidence for accreditation to show our growth over time. The connection doesn't end there, however. The results of the Cognia review at the end of the year will inform the creation of our new strategic plan, which again will launch in the fall of 2023. So at this time, Dr. Phillips and I would be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Can you go back one more? Okay, so just out of curiosity, is there a reason we have to get rid of one goal and replace it with another, and we can't keep both of those?
So, no, I mean, there's no reason except that we find that the second goal is not necessarily appropriate in a time when we have more kids in need of those interventions. Because we don't necessarily, we want to make sure that we're getting the right kids in, right? We still want them to come out of it. I understand that. And there's no need, we have to take that out, right? But we're feeling that in the wake of the pandemic, until we get back on even ground, and that may be when we write our new strategic plan, if we take a look at how well we push those kids forward with that top thing, that we may put that back in if it's taken out. But it was in our discussions, what we talked about was, is this really an appropriate goal for a time when we're going to be seeing more kids come in? Is that sustainable? Are we going to even is it achievable at that point? Does that make sense?
It does. A question would be, regardless of the quantity of kids that are in Tier 2 or Tier 3, the goal still should be that they meet those standards and they are moved out of that to possibly Tier 1 or
Correct.
out
And
of
I
intervention.
think, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You're good.
I think, though, that we'll find that if we achieve the goal at the top, we're achieving the goal at the bottom. So if we're pushing those kids to meet those growth targets and exceed them, then more and more are going to be coming out of those tiers than are going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Can you back up one more slide? So obviously we have let's call it a momentum rate. So there's a rate by which we are going up every year, fairly reliably, I would say, and consistently. And then, of course, we have pandemic year, and that cast us back. Do we expect the rate of recovery to be the same, less, or slower, or faster than our original rate of momentum? Meaning, is it going to take us twice as long to get to our original point that we were pre-pandemic?
So I guess.
And that's a crystal ball question.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's not something I answer. I've read things that say it's going to take 7 years, but I'm an optimist. And so I don't think, I like to hope. And I heard somebody say earlier tonight that hope is not a strategy. I hope that it doesn't take that long. I think in our data dig, what we're going to do is try to determine what that rate reasonably can be over the next 2 to 3 years, and see where we are at that point. And when we rewrite the strategic plan, then we can be more informed about what kind of stretch goals we can set to get us back there. So you're right, that's a crystal ball question, and that's my very vague and nebulous answer.
7 years that's a frightening
It is a frightening number.
number. If we're considering a 2 to 3 year potential learning loss, that's anywhere from 2x to 3x.
Right,
the
and
loss.
there's lots of theories out there about that. That's just one I've read.
Sure.
Dr. Phillips, do you mind if I add one thing?
Sure.
That's the reason we wanted to get the interim data at the end of September and the beginning of October, so we understand truly where our students are right now, not going off that number from the spring, but we hope that we've made up some ground too with our summer programming, and really, we hope for a really strong start at school, and so it's been a little bit rockier than we anticipated, but we do hope to get a more clear measure that will help us set those goals.
Yeah, so to be clear, just for everybody in the audience and watching at home, the numbers you have on the screen are just, they're hypothetical numbers.
Sure.
That's not
Right,
actually
this
the
is-
data that we're talking about.
But I would guess systematically, it would show that we're showing progression, at a certain rate, and then, of course, we take a step back, and then there's going to be a recovery rate, and hopefully, we'll be able to advance that. But Obviously, we're doing this in a time of restricted funding as well. I mean, there's only so much we can spend the dollars on as well to stopgap that measure.
Well, and to Ms. Gaskins' point, I think we've done quite a bit already since last spring that I think we're going to find is moving the needle a bit, and for a large number of our students. I mean, this summer was our largest summer programming probably in the history of the school district, and we will be doing that another 2 years, another 2 summers. So there's still a lot of that work to still be done.
And I would add, just real quick, one of the things that Dr. Osborne Smith mentioned earlier was that we are partnering with different groups to look at best practices for accelerated learning. One example of that is our partnership with Hanover Research that can help us benchmark our district's data against other districts around the country and help provide us with research behind what is working with goal setting, what is reasonable with goal setting, moving forward with strategic planning for our district.
Hey, this is Jada. I have a question. So our current strategic plan is 2018 to 2021, but I noticed this one doesn't officially begin until 2023. How were those last couple of years here? How were those goals established?
So were just numbers that we put on the page. This is not actually what you would see listed on the current strategic plan. So when the COVID happened, it was our second year of the strategic plan that we currently have. And with that disruption, we were not able to focus like we would normally do on our priorities because our focus was on safety of children and staff. So our goal here is to use the full 5-year cycle, that we're normally granted by the State Department, to really hone in now in our last 2 years to achieve the goals that we want to. So we're adjusting the targets that you see. I think on the strategic plan online, what you see is up to 2021. And so we're going to adjust the plan to add the 2 years that we normally would have in a strategic plan cycle.
Okay. I'm just kind of curious. So what part does the board play in this and the goals? Because I remember, way back in 2017, when we started the strategic plan cycle, as a citizen, I was sitting out there. But the board got all kinds of information about reducing class sizes, graduation rates. They got a thick 3-ring binder, and they set out there with the SLT. They got very detailed information, expanding programs. So is there a point that we will kind of get into the nitty-gritty of that as a board, and that we'll have input and we'll get reports and data?
So that typically happens at the initial writing stage of a strategic plan. So that would be next year, you would be involved in supporting our development of the plan or our strategic plan that goes from 2023 to 2028. This is an update to an already approved strategic plan by the State Department so that we can continue to work on the goals that were already set in the first drafting period that we had back in 2017.
2017, right. I guess what's confusing me is when everything I have, even things turned to the State Department of Education, they say the strategic plan, our current one is from 2018 to 2021. But now we're kind of skipping a little bit and not.
And I think I can clear, because when, I remember very vividly when we implemented this strategic plan, and it was kind of a bragging point, which is kind of funny in hindsight, that strategic plans are 5 years, and the State Department expects us to do a 5-year. We have this great idea to do it every 3 years, and we're going to ask, can we please do it in every 3 years? And they said, yeah, go ahead. And now we're saying, oh, COVID happened. We actually need that 5 years. So this is that same plan. It's just, instead of being 3 years, we're going to take the 5 years that we thought we didn't need, but we actually do need because we've been off track for the last. Is that correct, Dr. Little?
And I would hope when we start getting into our writing next year that we will also consider a 3-year plan, even though it's a 5-year cycle. I know that's confusing, but the 3-year plan really captures that idea of flexibility and adaptability better And under normal circumstances, we would already be, I guess our planning year would have been this year. We do also have to consider, one thing just to say, that to do our strategic plan and our Cognia accreditation in the same year may not be the wisest of decision points. As Dr. Osmer Smith and Dr. Shane Phillips are sweating profusely now that even the possibility of doing both of those things at the same time. But it's really just an extension of that, and we'll share that, obviously, with the board. You'll have opportunities to comment and give feedback.
So are we trying to change it so that we're not on the same cycle as Cognia?
It was very helpful last time to get the accreditation feedback first. I'm sorry, switch gears on you. It was very helpful last time to get the accreditation feedback last time and then develop the plan. And so that cycle is going to work out for us again this year.
Okay, thank you. Thank y'all.
Thank you, board.